We're on the record. Thank you, Bonnie. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today is 8:15. Thank you for allowing us to push this meeting back 15 minutes because the football team was supposed to be playing. They're not. Anyway, tonight is the Planning and Zoning Special Meeting, December 3rd. We have a public hearing and a general meeting. The first item on the agenda is a continuation of the public hearing regarding proposed amendments to the Darien Zoning Regulations, COZR number 5, 2019, put forth by Felix F. Callari, Inc., doing business as BMW of Darien. Jeremy, to correct me if I'm wrong, we kept this open kind of as a courtesy to Jackie at Carmody
Yes.
Law Firm, because
Yes.
she wanted the chance to speak to Mr. Gleason and his client with regards to any other wording and whatnot.
That's correct. That was a meeting in November, and you have before you a document, Exhibit A1 from Wilder Gleason, which has yellow highlighting on it, which is front and back.
We have that in front of us?
Yeah? No? You're going to get that, Fred, you made copies of that? This one?
The other we got was this.
And
I
then
have copies.
Wilder's going to distribute that, and then you also have a letter from Jackie Kaufman at Carmody Torrance. My understanding is there was a discussion in the interim time between the last public hearing and tonight, and both parties are going to come to you tonight with additional information to discuss the zone change proposal.
Okay, so I do see Jackie in
That's right.
our audience. Thank you. Okay, so this is why they're putting this. So why, Mr. Gleason, or Attorney Gleason, why don't you take us away if you don't mind? Jackie's back there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We did have, while she was apparently flying down to, on the plane, Jackie drafted an email to me, which I received on Sunday. We talked about it. She was delayed coming back and didn't have a chance to get to me in the last 2 days, but we talked today. And in response to her comments, I consulted my clients, and we felt that her clients were expressing concerns that we needed design controls and more control over the raised rooftop parking structure, which we're contemplating conceptually putting in the back lot of the BMW property. And we think a colorable claim could be made that rooftop parking is not structured parking, but we don't want to go there. And we felt it was appropriate, since structured parking is not defined, that we might as well just roll this into structured parking. And looking at what you did in the Central Business District and the Norotan Heights District, where you said structured parking is an accessory use, or in the CBD, it can be a principal use, and in the Norotan Heights zone. We don't think structured parking should be a principal use in the 3 larger service business properties that are affected by our amendment. We think they should be an accessory use to an allowed principal use in the SB zone. We're talking just about the 3, the Whole Foods, the BMW, and the Jaguar properties are the only ones affected by this text amendment. And so we're limiting it to that, and we think that if we are going to have rooftop parking, it should be subject to the same standards that you imposed when you approved the development of the Corbin Subdistrict for Baywater properties, and for the Walgreens and the other parking, structured parking that's allowed at the Norotan Heights. And that's all in section 907. And so I added, if you'll see, a new section 755D, and the highlighted is the change at the beginning of the exhibit I just sent. And by the way, I misstated it. It's actually 12-3 when we submitted it, so I corrected that on the exhibit I just handed to you. But we defined, and this is the change from the prior text amendment, structured parking is allowed as an accessory use requiring a special permit in accordance with section 907 for lots, and I changed the language to lots as an ode to Mr. Riley's suggestion, meeting the requirements of section 756E. And I modified the language in Note E to say a lot as opposed to a property. Again, in response to Mr. Riley's comments. And then I've attached Section 907, and I highlighted the most important condition or standard which you must find in order to approve structured parking, which is the commission must make an affirmative finding that no neighboring property will be adversely impacted by such parking structure. That's a pretty rigorous standard. 907 has many other standards that I won't go into, but you've looked at those, you've used those to vet parking structures in the CBD and the Norotan Heights district, and if it was good enough for them, it should be good enough for us in our three larger lots that are affected by this. And so I think we've really tried to reach out and respond to the concerns expressed by the neighbors that there's no standards and we're sort of running amok here. And there was a letter that we received late this afternoon. I just looked at it moments ago. And I think I'll just let Jackie speak to that, and then hopefully I get an opportunity to reply.
Now, just to go back, there was an email that came Monday. We got it. It says, just received from pending text change. It's from what's in this email from Monday. It's from you to Jackie. It's pretty much what you talked about, right?
Right. I told her on Monday that in response to what she was doing, we thought it would be appropriate to add structured parking. It avoids any question about whether rooftop parking is structured parking or not. It puts us into 907, which has a whole set of rigorous standards that you have used already. And it should address, I think, the concerns that her clients had raised. Because she responded affirmatively later this afternoon, it's clear that it has not satisfied her clients. So,
It just to make sure we're all on the same page, this is a zoning change, an amendment to an existing zoning, which is effectively we're changing the coverage from 20% to 25%, right?
right. And the building height is going from 25 to 30 feet.
Right, so we're not getting into site plans, we're not getting to any of that stuff?
None of that. We need to know what the rules are before we can go into the design details and geotechnical to see what we've conceived, if it's possible.
Right.
And then we're happy to work with them on the way we've been, back and forth, to make sure that their concerns are addressed in a reasonable manner. And if we feel we can't address the concerns, then it'll be up to you to be the arbiter as to whether or not we've met the standards.
Okay, and just correct if I'm wrong, Jeremy, and also for the new people on the commission, we've taken great pains in the last 2 to 4 years to separate these two things. A lot of times people will put forth an application and a zoning change or a zoning change application at the same time, and at one time they were blended. We purposely bifurcated them and separated them and actually even made them on separate days so the lines don't get blurred. I mean, I appreciate you putting forth what your plan was and Craig doing that too, but it's two separate deals.
That was a conceptual plan only. We weren't
Understood.
locked in, and they didn't take it as being locked in, but it was an effort to give people an idea that we are looking at this in a way to address neighbor concerns going forward.
Am I correct in saying that?
That's correct.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Would anybody else like to speak to this application? Seeing one, please come forward.
Good evening. My name is Jackie Kaufman. I'm an attorney with Carmody, Torrance, Sandak, and Hennessy. Excuse my voice. I lost it over the weekend. But I represent Middlesex Commons Condominium, the adjoining property owner. Thank you for the extra time in getting us to tonight. It was a bit challenging between the holiday and then the weather yesterday, which delayed me in getting back, so I didn't have the chance to work yesterday with my team and with Mr. Gleason as much as I expected to. That being said, I think we made some progress today. I think adding the structured parking is certainly a helpful clarification. But I want to just go back to some additional design controls that I think we need. What I had originally shared with Mr. Gleason and his client was a more intense or text text change, and I think by looping in and bringing in Section 907, we were able to alleviate that. But something that Section 700 does in the SB zone, since the SB zone is a very intense zone, is that you do have special design controls that are associated in three distinct categories. One is general, one has to do with senior living, and a third as well. But I think that this would also be an important, but would be a missed opportunity if special controls were not applied in this text change to automotive service uses that are eligible for this new expansion of both coverage and height, especially and primarily where they border residential properties, which two of them we know do, and I think will be important. So what I've done here is made some suggestions to some of those special controls. I think they are.
Was that this letter to me dated
Yes,
December 3rd?
the letter states our position here, and then on the second page, I can go through these special controls. But we have here SB zone and automotive service zone. So what we're looking at is a text change that will allow for a building to be larger and higher, and on properties that border residential properties. And there are zoning controls in place now that have limited what the expectation is, and now those are being expanded. So I think this is an important opportunity to make sure that those are appropriately put forward in a site plan. I've been on, I often and most often represent developers. I know that site plans are not often set in stone before you come in when you do bifurcate these like you do. And my client absolutely respects that. But given the proximity, and we saw some of those pictures at the last meeting of these two properties, and we saw a conceptual site plan which tripled the size of the service building and proposed to have rooftop parking. Well,
Triples the size of service, but it's also taking down a big service building too. They're demolishing.
Well, right, we're talking about I'm not talking about what's happening in the front. While it is definitely, there is a trade-off between what's happening in the front and now the back. What's happening is that we are bringing an intensified use to the rear of the property, which is further away from 95, further away from other commercial properties, and putting it a little bit closer. No, we're not talking about site plan, but if we're talking just conceptually about how this text could be applied on this property, this is a way that we have seen this text be applied. So we're just talking about what we've seen here. And that's of concern. That's fine. But when we look at the activity, it's intensifying, it's getting bigger, closer to the residential property. We have setbacks in place, there's landscaping and special permit controls that certainly will help. But there are also other opportunities to ensure that these two uses can peacefully coexist. Represented automobile dealerships and service facilities before, and I know about. I have
Okay,
personally
I thought so.
in
I
other
hope so.
in other communities, and it's an intense use. Not necessarily the dealership side of it or the commercial business side of it and the sales, let alone just having inventory, but the actual service component produces noise and fumes and dust, and it's an operation sometimes that is 12 plus hours a day. And a lot of the auto facilities in Fairfield County, particularly here in Darien, like we see in New Canaan and Westport, they're dealing with small properties and they're jockeying a lot of cars around. It's a lot of activity happening at once every day consistently. So while we don't know what happens on a rooftop, if service buildings can expand, and Section 907 allows for rooftop parking, and we've seen it applied in other places. And we know that in other places it was for residential and commercial, which are less intense uses. Those uses calm down at the end of the day, and they're calmer and early in the morning. This use is not. This use goes on all day long. And
Walgreens is pretty intense.
Is it a 24-hour Walgreens?
I don't know if it's going to be 24 hours, but it might be.
If you end up permitting a 24-hour operation and you have 24 hours going up from people up and down on the roof, that will be something I'm sure you'll deal with. But it's something that has to be considered where it borders it. So the use, we look at it, this is an automotive service rooftop use. This is not your average parking garage. It's it's not. And while I'm using this BMW as an example, it is important as you make something larger and you create a greater coverage and greater surface, you're bringing that parking off of the ground and up. And so what we've done here is, I think it's distinguishable from Walgreens in the intensity of the use, absolutely. So
They could also be using this for, inventory. We don't know what they're going to be using.
we don't know. But I think that's exactly the point that the commission needs to consider, is that we don't know what it's going to be used for. If the applicant could say, this is our business model, that might solve a lot of these problems, but they
Right.
don't have to. They don't have to.
This is a zone change. This is not.
It is a text change. They do not need to bring those operational components
You'll
to
know
our
about it,
attention now.
yeah.
But I think it is incumbent on the commission to consider the parade of horribles, if you will, about how these things can be used and how they can be controlled. So I've reviewed the text change that's before you, and I've suggested a few edits, particularly to 755. Mr. Gleason has added structured parking in accordance with Section 907 for lots meeting the requirements of Section 756E.
Are you reading from something, Jackie? I'm sorry.
Yes, that's Mr. Gleason's proposed
Okay.
text change, 12.3 today, and highlighted in yellow.
But I'm looking at this letter, okay.
Yes, and I've copied that here on mine as well, so if you turn to page 4. I suggest that we add to that, where all or part of said structured parking is proposed as an accessory use to automotive services. Additional special controls and design standards are set forth below, have to be adhered to in the site plan special permit process. And I've gone on to suggest some of those special controls. Specifically, that structured parking, inclusive of either a freestanding parking structure or rooftop parking, because since they don't know, and we don't know how these could be used, I think both should be included here, that they comply with Section 907, and that there are prohibited rooftop activities where they are associated with an automotive service, that being vehicle stacking, automobile rental use, painting, washing, drying, auto repair, service work. If it is simply for parking, if it is for inventory parking, and it is then required to be designed in a manner that is consistent with a typical parking garage, which will have stalls of a certain size and dimension, lanes of a certain width and dimension, so it won't be overburdened, park tandem, completely back-to-back with people jockeying cars around all day, which can be very distracting. Again, it's coming up higher. And when you saw the grade change between this property and the BMW property, that's a very significant impact. On parcels adjoining a residential zone, the top level of a parking structure shall have rooftop planters. I say that specifically here with something around it to minimize that impact. I understand there are special permit controls, but again, we're talking about a different type of use, an automotive service parking versus a standard garage. And we think that that's an important to keep. When we look through some of the other special design controls in this section, you do add specific landscaping requirements above and beyond those that exist elsewhere in the regulations. I've just captured the wall height, which is something that you have both in your regulations and that the BMW applicant suggested at the last meeting, having with the approval of ARB and consistent with also Section 7573. And using the word dense landscaping buffers, which is also used elsewhere in your regulations, shall be installed along the perimeter. That has to do with the whole building here. And then I go on to add some additional light controls, noise controls, loudspeakers. Again, these are consistent with other special design control features that you have in this section and other sections. So I did not think it was inappropriate to reiterate them here. And then we'll go on to discuss circulation. Again, we don't know what's happening here. I think it's important that if there's going to be a large building here and there's going to be more activity here, that we have some additional standards for queuing and circulation patterns that are considered now as opposed to just through site plan and special permit. So as the text change is proposed to you, my clients continue to object to that, and suggest that another month continuance may be appropriate if we need to do a deeper dive into what is suggested here. And I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Well, at the end of the day, it's the Planning and Zoning Commission that sets what the regulations are going to be.
Yes, I know.
You know, so you're putting forth something, they're putting forth something. I venture to guess that we can decide as a commission of what we think is appropriate or what's not appropriate. I don't want to get super granular on this, because there's going to be there could be another application at some point in time with special permits and all kinds of other design criteria. You know, so we're going to have another bite at the apple, but the structure is what I kind of want to get to now.
I think so too, but the physical structure, increasing in height, increasing in coverage, and bringing a service, really an industrial use closer to a residential property. As I said in this letter, the town plan of development encourages preservation of SB uses. Those are rare. These are jewels in many of our towns now. We don't have a lot of opportunity to grow these uses, but it certainly doesn't authorize or even guide the commission to intensify uses where they're going to negatively impact a residential property. So I know that we have places where it vaguely in our regulation says it shouldn't do this, it shouldn't do that, it should not negatively impact a residential property, but some of those standards aren't set. And there is law out there which contemplates and adjudicates how those were perhaps not properly, those standards were not properly met during zoning hearings. So putting in additional special design control standards will make for I think a stronger site plan and special permit process, and will also allow these two property owners to work together and be on the same